Hello students, welcome to video lesson 9.4a. We're going to continue our discussion in this video on solving quadratic equations, but we're going to complicate them just a little bit more than in our last video. We are going to be solving quadratic equations that are in what we consider standard form. Okay, and standard form is right here. I just need to put the little squared on there. Okay. So standard form is here. We have something x squared plus something x plus something equal to 0. Okay. So as an example for you, this would be like the things that we looked at towards the end of chapter 8. Something like, x squared plus 7x plus 10 equals 0. This would be considered the standard form of a quadratic equation. Okay. The standard form of a quadratic equation is this. Something x squared plus something x plus a number equal to 0. All right. So we're going to solve these types of equations, finding potentially multiple solutions, right? Potentially two solutions for these equations. And because we now see the x variable showing up twice in this equation, right? We have once here with the x squared and we have once here with the x term in the middle. Because we see it twice, we can't just undo things like we did in the last video, okay? So when the variable shows up more than once, we cannot just undo things and end up square rooting things and so on. Okay, so we need a new strategy. And that new strategy involves something called the zero product property, all right? And it's a really important idea. And it's going to lead us to basically the strategy that we have. The strategy we're going to use is the zero product property. And what that property says is right here. If we have two things, two numbers or two anythings, and we multiply them together and they equal 0, okay? So, A times B, when I multiply these two things together, if I get 0, then one of the two things that I multiplied has to equal 0, right? So if the two things multiplied together are 0, then either the first thing was 0 or the second thing is 0. Okay, those are the only options. Because if neither one of them was 0, if A was not 0 and B was not 0, multiplying them together, I shouldn't get an answer of 0, right? So, for example, if A was 2 and B was 4, multiply them together, you don't get 0. If A was 1 and B was 17, you multiply them together, you don't get 0. The only way you can get 0 when two things are multiplied, in this case A and B, the only way we can get 0 is if one or the other is 0. Okay? So what we're going to do then is we're going to look at these A's and B's as factors in parentheses from a quadratic equation. Okay, so like what we looked at back in chapter 8, when we let's take this equation up here again, for example, x squared plus 7x plus 10. Can we factor that equation into two sets of parentheses? Well, we would need to find two numbers that multiply to 10 and add up to 7, and that would be x plus 5 and x plus 2, right? So that left-hand side, this quadratic piece, factors into these two sets of parentheses. Right? And if it still says equals 0 on the other side, well, then right here are my A and my B, right? My first thing and my second thing, that when I multiply them together, because remember the two parentheses next to each other implies multiply, those two things multiplied together equals 0, so one of the two has to be 0, all right? And that is going to lead us to our two solutions, all right? So if we look, for example, here at an equation that's already been factored for us, they actually use the window method to do this. But if we look at this equation, what we notice is we have two sets of parentheses, 4t plus 1 and t minus 2. And those two sets of parentheses are being multiplied together and they equal 0. Because this is true, because 4t plus 1 t minus 2, when we multiply them, they get 0. I have two options. 4t plus 1 is equal to 0, or t minus 2 is equal to 0. Okay? So I use the zero product property that says if these two things multiplied together equals 0, one of them has to be 0, to set up two different equations that I can then solve just like I used to do at the beginning of this class, okay? 0 minus 1 is -1, and then I divide away the 4, and I get t equals -1/4 as a fraction. This one over here doesn't involve fractions. That's kind of nice. We just get t is equal to 2, okay? So here's one of my answers. That came from this first set of parentheses. Here's another one of my answers. That came from that second set of parentheses, right? These two answers come from setting each set of parentheses equal to 0 because of that zero product property that says one of them has to be 0, okay? These are my two options. Either this is the value or this is the value. Two different solutions that'll both work out just fine, all right? Now, much of our homework, we're going to be asked to sort of do the factoring part ourselves, okay? So here we have this equation. X squared plus 8x plus 15 is equal to 0. And they're asking me to find the solutions. They're asking me to solve this equation. Now, again, notice that I see the x two different times, so I can't just undo things. So I look at the quadratic piece. I look at this, x squared plus 8x plus 15, and I ask myself, can I factor that? Can I turn this into two sets of parentheses? Well, I would need to find two numbers that multiply to make 15 and add up to make 8. Two numbers that multiply to make 15, add up to make 8. Numbers that multiply to 15, like 1 and 15, or 3 and 5. I guess that's it, but 3 and 5 work, right? Because 3 plus 5 is 8. So 3 and 5, x plus 5, x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, and now I do have these two sets of parentheses. X plus 3, x plus 5. When I multiply them together, they equal 0. So from the zero product property, I should be able to set up two equations. X plus 3 equals 0 from the first set of parentheses here. X plus 5 equals 0 from the second set of parentheses. By the way, in your homework, I am going to want to see this type of work. Okay, I want to see the factors. I want to see them each set equal to 0. And then I want to see your answers. Okay, so here I would minus 3. That goes away. 0 minus 3 is -3. This one I would minus 5. X equals, that's gone. 0 minus 5 is -5. So I get -5, -3. So if I was given a multiple choice option, here's my answer right here. These are my two answers, -5, -3. And they come from factoring that quadratic into the parentheses and setting each one equal to 0, okay? The last thing that I want to point out to you in this video is remember that when we factor quadratic equations, or when we were factoring in chapter 8, we always had to look for a greatest common factor first, because sometimes we end up with an equation that looks like this. Okay, so I see the equals 0, okay? I see the equals 0. By the way, in order for the zero product property to work, it absolutely has to be equal to 0. You cannot do this factoring stuff if it doesn't equal 0. Okay, and what I mean by that is this. If I just go back up here for just a second, if I had something like this, x plus 2 times x minus 3 equals 6, it does not work to set x plus 2 equal to 6 and x minus 3 equal to 6. Okay, this right here, you guys, does not work. Okay, doesn't work. You can't do that. It has to be equal to 0 in order for the zero product property to work and in order for us to set up those two equations, okay? So in this case, I do see that, but this side, I don't have the full quadratic equation, right? There's no number plus at the end. But one thing that I want you to notice is in these two pieces, I have some common things I could factor out to the front of a set of parentheses, right? 4 and 12 can both be divided by 4. X squared and x, I can take an x out of both of those, and I'll end up with something like this, okay? Like undistributing this. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. X squared taking out an x just leaves me with an x. And then 12 divided by 4 is 3. X divided by x, that x is now gone to the front, so it's not here anymore. And I end up with this factored version, okay? And this factored version really still is two things multiplied together. One of them just happens to not be in parentheses, okay? But my two options now, or my two factors now, are 4x and x plus 3, right? I don't really need the 1 to be here. So I can still do the zero product property because it says equals 0. And I can just set 4x equal to 0. And I can set x plus 3 equal to 0. Okay. Now this one I'm going to solve not by minusing 4, but by dividing away the 4. And 0 divided by 4, we know that's 0, right? 0 divided by anything is still 0. So x equals 0. And then this side I'm going to minus the 3 on both sides. And I basically end up with two different equations I need to solve. And they say 0 and -3, okay? So here's one of my answers, x equals 0. Here's the other one, x equals -3, all right? So look for some examples maybe in your homework that look like this, where you're going to factor out something, and then you're not going to have two sets of parentheses, but you're going to have something in front of a set of parentheses that's equal to 0, okay? And that's generally going to lead you to an answer of x equals 0. If you have any questions about how we use the zero product property to take a factored version of a quadratic and turn it into the two solutions, do please reach out to me somehow. Otherwise, you'll hear more about factoring in our next video for tomorrow. And that's all I have for you right now, and we will talk to you soon.